Welcome to Hear Her Sports, a podcast about exceptional female athletes in women's sports. There are a lot of us out there. Find us, see us, hear us. Before I get started, a quick reminder that our partner Allie's Bar is offering 50% off and free shipping to Hear Her Sports listeners. Use the promo code HERSPORTS at alliesbar.com. Head to hearhersports.com membership page for more information. Hey, I'm super excited. This week, rugby player Phaidra Knight is my guest. Phaidra is one of the sport's all-time greats. She was named Player of the Decade in 2010, participated 3 times in Rugby World Cup, and was twice named to the All-World team. But what I like best about our conversation is the importance that she gives to quality coaching and how she herself is making a commitment to developing the future of the sport. She was recently hired by Monroe College as the women's rugby coach. They have a new program launching in the fall, and she's currently in the recruiting phase. If I were looking to play college rugby, I certainly would be looking at Monroe College. I'm sure that Phaidra would be an absolutely amazing coach. She also has an infectious enthusiasm for the sport. I'm now a fan and plan on making the trip to San Francisco next year to see the Rugby World Cup Sevens. Well, let's get started. Because not everybody is familiar with rugby, I started out by asking Phaidra to introduce us to the sport. Here she is.
My name is Phaidra Knight, and I've played rugby in the U.S. for the last 20 years. I've been a part of the U.S. Team program for 18 of those 20 years. And just a quick pitch on rugby. It's undeniably the most spectacular sport in the world. It's the second largest sport globally, second to soccer. But I think, credit to soccer being the parent of rugby, and soccer being a great sport. But rugby is absolutely just a fascinating thing to watch, and probably most recently on a global scale evidenced by the emergence of the sport in the Olympics. Rugby sevens is the faster form of rugby, smaller number of players on the field at a time, 7 per team, played on the same large field that 15s, which is the more traditional form of rugby, is played on. It took the world by storm, really, in August during the Olympic Games, and was easily one of the top emerging sports in the Olympics. One of the most popular sports actually viewed. It's incredible. It offers the contact of football, but in probably a much more technical, played out way. It offers the exciting, fast pace of track and field with the varying and explosive speeds of many of the players that engage. It offers incredible teamwork, which is just inherently a part of the game, and it offers it offers so much. It offers I think something that you don't necessarily see initially, but as you watch the game and watch the mannerisms of the players, it offers a camaraderie, respect, and a set of core values that no other sport offers, which essentially extends so far beyond the game and the sport of rugby that I think no other sport really offers.
Why do you think that's the case?
It has a lot to do with just the inherent nature of the sport, right? And how the game is governed. There's respect, there's resilience, there's persistence, and obviously there's teamwork. And the laws that govern the game, there's certain things that just aren't tolerated. And the culture that surrounds the game, there's certain behaviors that just don't mix, right? They don't align. And so that is inherent, and that is uniform essentially across the board, no matter what rugby team, you're dealing with. And so if there are bad apples in the barrel, they're quickly sort of cast out. And so it's just why it is. That's just how it was formed. Those are the things that were, I think, considered and made a part of the game at its very early existence. But yeah, it was a sport that the rules of the game again demanded all of those core values that I mentioned, and then the culture surrounding the game did the same. And so, those things have been long held as the sport has grown, both women's and men's. It's identical; it doesn't change. And so it's just a fascinating thing, and there's such the culture of it. Some in many ways, kind of I don't want to say supersedes the game, but it's as much a part of the actual playing of the game as as the playing of the game, right? Yeah, it's just a tremendous thing, and the people that are a part of it, that play the sport and that are fans of the sport, really understand that passion. I think in America in particular, in countries that rugby was virtually unknown, having this rugby sevens was a great hook because it was fast enough and to capture the attention span and not too long, right? And it was few enough players that were involved in it so that that would allow the naive and rugby uneducated eye to understand and grasp the sport enough to know and follow it in a way that they could kind of get hooked. Where I'm going with that is that although the general public and the folks that were exposed to it through the rugby, through the Olympics, weren't necessarily hip to the culture, I think you get people hooked on the sport, and then they will then become exposed to that culture because there's that desire to want to see more rugby, maybe even support a local or club rugby team, or even just watch more rugby. And the more you watch it, the more you love it, and the more you become exposed to that culture just by default. So.
Do you prefer one or the other, the sevens or the 15s, personally?
I over my career played both, at every level, and I love sevens. It's incredible. As a player, like when I was really not to necessarily cast myself out, but when I was really in my prime of playing, I played sevens for the U.S. And at that time, I actually preferred it because I'd only been exposed mostly to 15s. Which I love, right? And that's really what my bread and butter has been over the course of my career. But it offers something a little different. It offered, me as a forward an opportunity to make those long passes that only backs really make in a 15s match. And really, they don't make passes that long either. So it allowed me, I think the reason why I liked it so much better at that time was it allowed me to develop and increase the scope of my skill set just to evolve as a player. It allowed me also to do things and run in ways that I wouldn't traditionally do as a forward. So it challenged me to be a much broader player, and I think that's what that's what really attracted me at that time to sevens. Now that said, as I have graduated in the age ranks, it's certainly, the recovery demands of rugby sevens, especially at the international game, they're tremendous, and they certainly play into the hands of a much younger player. That's just science. So as I've gotten older, it's definitely become more challenging to, keep up and maintain that type of recovery, or be able to maintain that type of recovery that's demanded in sevens. But I still love it. It's awesome. It's still awesome to play. My focus right now is on rugby 15s, and I love it. And being away from 15s for, I think it was up till this year I hadn't played 15 since 2010. So it stepped away from it, or at least last year. So 6 years of being away from it and returning to it, it's certainly, something at this phase of my life that I prefer and that I love. And I support sevens and love watching it at this point, and maybe even playing it a little bit just to keep the fitness up and to keep the skills kind of sharp that I won't necessarily be able to do in 15. So I love them both. I just love rugby. So.
Right. So what does make a good rugby player, and what are the differences between, you've gotten into it a little bit, but what are the differences between a good 15s player and a good sevens player? Well,
the name of the game for rugby sevens is speed. That's it. It's a game of speedsters, and it's a game of again, who can recover the quickest, right, after a 100-meter sprint. Or 2 back-to-back 50-meter sprints and tackle.
When you're recruiting, what kind of 100-meter times are you looking at?
I don't know. The testing protocol is not particularly for 100-meter. It's more 40-meter. So the test currently employed for speed is the 40-meter dash. And, I think probably the ideal speed would range anywhere from, and then obviously if it drops below, if someone can run below like a 5.2 or 5.3 40, all the better, right? But the speeds that I've seen of the players that have represented at the international level range between probably a 5.3 and 5.9 on that 40-meter dash, and it could go up depending on the player and what they offer. But it's generally in that range. Probably your mean time is somewhere around 5.6, 5.7, and I'm shaving off some hundredths of a second, which are actually a lot in that world. But in that range, yeah, I think that would probably fit the profile of most women's sevens teams.
Right. Okay, so we have speed that the sevens need, and what else?
So you need speed. You need to be able to, like in 15s, pass. But the type of pass that's employed in sevens is slightly different, right? So it's a longer pass. The average pass in sevens, I think, is somewhere around 7 meters or so. But you're passing up to 15 meters, and that's a pretty big distance. And so a sevens player has to really have the ability to nail their target, which is obviously the hands of their teammate, sometimes under pressure, to throw a concise and accurate pass and good pass to their teammates. So passing is key. Tackling, just like in 15s, is key. And in sevens, there are a lot of breakaways, so there's a lot of probably the chop tackle is the most common one in sevens. You rarely get the opportunity, or less so than in 15s, to do like a head-on tackle. So the ability to really move laterally in sevens is crucial. So that's going to demand a lot of flexibility in the hips, probably more so than in 15s. And like I said, that ability to just move laterally. So you are moving laterally in 15s, but it's not the same, because in sevens you have 7 people on the field, so you have much more space to cover, both horizontal and laterally, and so you need to be able to move in both directions very quickly. Communication, it's a big thing. Less bodies on the field, again, more space. That ability to communicate. But I think communication in 15s too is as crucial. So a lot of those points, are very similar. And the games, it's funny because a lot of the terminology that we're using now in 15s is the same terminology that's used in sevens. The sevens game is much more contact in this day and time than it was 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And so the two 15s and sevens are similar in those ways, but it's, so So it's no longer a thing of, okay, you could just be fast and small, and just be able to run around people in the game of sevens. You have to be strong and you have to be able to take a hit like a player in the game of 15s has to in order to be successful in it. So the kicking, there's probably less kicking in sevens, so that's another point of difference. Although there is strategic kicking, especially when the sweeper is caught, there is no sweeper, or when, it's just advantageous and to relieve pressure and make sense. But you see much more kicking in 15s. And so being able to really think under pressure strategically, I think is probably a little more crucial in sevens because you have less time. And so every decision you make could be the difference in winning and losing a match. You have just more opportunities to make, I don't want to say bad decisions, but you can, sometimes make a few more mistakes in 15s because you have more opportunities. So, there's that ratio, where you do have to obviously make great decisions and do good things in 15s, but there's that allowance to have a little bit more cushion because you have a 80-minute time period versus a 14-minute time period to right those mistakes, right? So,
is it hard to teach the tactics since I'm imagining most of your players come to you pretty new to the sport? They haven't been playing it in grade school and college and high school.
Right. At this point, there's more, obviously. There are more players now than there were, again, 5-10 years ago, coming out of high school programs, coming through the ranks out of college who have played. When we're talking about the U.S. team, a number of those players did actually play in college. And so they're not just fresh off the street. You do have some crossover athletes, like a Lev Kelter, who's a crossover athlete, but she's been immersed in the sport for, I think, the last probably 3 or 4 years, give or take a year or two. So, and she played high level sports, high level, at other sports. And I think athleticism, there's a great, in the U.S. especially, we cultivate some of the best athletes in the world. And so that carries us a lot further than most countries. And we can rely on that pure athleticism to keep us in probably in a good place until our skills kind of catch up. And so, yeah, there are these crossover athletes, but then you have like players like Nia Tapper on the U.S. Sevens team who played in college at UNC, but was just an incredible athlete in general, right? And so as she's played and developed her skill set more, she's become undisputedly one of the best sevens players in the world, and in a very, very short amount of time. So, yeah, there are less players than probably other countries with less a legacy in rugby before coming in, into or onto the international scene. But there are certainly, a large number of the players that are there did play prior to coming in. So they didn't start in grade school, but they did start. With all of the studies that are emerging concerning like sports specialization at a young age, I actually think it plays to our benefit, right? To not necessarily, let's say, specialize. It would be great to be exposed to rugby at a young age, but I think specializing in any sport, it limits a kid. So I think it's good that a lot of these athletes haven't necessarily been so focused on one sport, and rugby, being that, and that they're more focused on just being great athletes because they'll catch on.
How are you going to adopt that philosophy? And I know that you've started a youth program in New York State. So how are you going to adopt that?
My take is I don't think that, again, these kids should necessarily just be playing rugby. So in terms of working it into what I, aspire to create here in New York and then hopefully expand countrywide is to, show them rugby, teach them, the basics of it but it won't be necessarily an everyday thing at that youth age, because I want to be able to offer kids that freedom to explore their other sports, and explore other things, that aren't necessarily sport, so that they can develop wholly. That creates balance, and it ultimately creates just a better human being in general. So it's essentially it's utilizing rugby, much like Play Rugby's motto is basically to create great human beings or to foster or inspire great humanity through the the sport of rugby. Rugby just simply being a medium, and to teach these core values that will, feed into that philosophy so that these little people continue to grow and align to evolve into even great big people. It's a business model that I've created at this point to hopefully launch. It's probably going to be changing. It'll be hopefully constantly continue to evolve into something a little different and a little more inclusive of other things, so that it reflects what number one the kids need and what they want, and I think what really the sport is all about.
Since we're talking about kids and youth programs, can you talk about the aggression of the sport, and is it as violent as its reputation?
That's a funny question. I did a video shoot a couple weeks ago with Richie McCaw and Alev Kelter and Nate Ebner of the Patriots. We were talking about, I don't know, just very casually, I was talking with one of them about, the one thing that kind of binds us all is rugby players definitely come to the table with some anger issues. And so it's not necessarily a prerequisite, and I'm sure that there are people that out there that play the sport that don't necessarily feel that way, but I think a large majority of us definitely, we're dealing with some stuff. We come to the sport. It offers an avenue to really express ourselves and express that emotion, or at least kind of get an understanding of it. But the cool thing about it is that when you employ the laws of the sport, the culture of the sport into that equation, it does turn into just pure aggression, right? It becomes, instead of just anger and all of this crazy emotional stuff, you learn, or I have learned, how to circumvent that into just aggression. And as you work through those emotions, because we're human beings, we're flooded with emotions. All of us are flooded with hopefully every emotion, so that we feel the full effect of the spectrum. But we learn and we mature and we grow in a way that we learn how to express, through aggression, and then we become more in tune to the technical elements of the game. So then we start, we use our intellect, and so yeah, it's really aggressive. It's super aggressive, but I think that it's comparable to other things in other walks of life. I mean, football is super aggressive also. I think soccer in its way is very aggressive. Doesn't necessarily utilize the vehicle of tackling, but, people are aggressive. They run aggressively. Sport, I think, is aggressive within itself. And I think many times, because rugby players don't wear pads, we don't wear protective equipment, we get tagged or pinged as being like these crazy, overly aggressive, just insane people out here playing this brutal sport. When in reality, yeah, it is a little brutal. It can be a little tough for the average person. But I guarantee you take the average person and you teach them technically how to play the game. You train them to have kind of a baseline of fitness to play the game. Yeah, they'll be roughed up after the first few matches. They'll feel like they've been in a minor car accident, maybe even a major one, after their first exposure to the sport. But they will adjust, and their bodies will acclimate to that that everything you go through in a rugby game, there's no one word to characterize it. And at some point, they'll gain that fitness. They'll get the fitness that every rugby player that's been playing for years and years has, and it will become like nothing. Now, what I will say is, it's like I sometimes I wonder, and I get injuries. I get like these little. For me, at this point, it's like my hands and my feet, my fingers and my toes suffer probably the most. And I'll go in and see like my chiropractor or my orthopedist, and I'll say, I wonder why this happened to me. And they're like, well, you're playing rugby. What do you expect? Like, you're playing a collision sport. So, at some point, if you ram your car into a wall, 10 times, your car is going to get some damage at least once out of those 10 times, right? Definitely, probably 10 times out of 10 times, right? But so you can't expect a different result sometimes because you're playing. That's the nature of the sport. It's the nature of the beast. But as aggressive as it is, there's a tremendous amount of respect, and there's a certain there's a definitely a level of I guess there's no other way to say it, respect that's demanded in the game so that it keeps the game safe within its constructs. And so, although aggressive and although seemingly brutal in many ways, it's probably I think probably a safer sport in the contact realm because the technical elements are driven home so much and are patrolled so closely by the laws of the game and the refs that oversee that process. So, yeah.
So let's go back to the Olympics, and I'm interested in knowing if you think that the rugby being included in the Olympics is going to carry over and keep interest in the Olympics going forward, until the next Olympics.
I do believe that the Olympics had an incredible impact on the sport. I mean, USA Rugby saw traffic jump from, I think daily they would get maybe 300,000 or so hits a day. And during that Olympic period, especially during the time that the women were playing, that number spiked to 35 million. I mean, that's an incredible jump. So that was the immediate impact on the sport. But, fortunately, what's happening here in the U.S. is that the U.S. will be hosting the 2018 Rugby Sevens World Cup.
I am so excited about that.
It's huge. And so, although you'll have this 4-year gap between the games, next year we'll have this opportunity to re-engage with those same teams and many of those same players that we saw in the Olympics. And so I think that is going to be critical, and that's a critical component to maintaining the momentum that we enjoyed during the games. What is also going to be crucial, though, in continuing this build-up and the continuance of growing and exposing the sport and building a fan base is building that fan base very organically by creating more youth, putting more emphasis on youth rugby and also on coaching development. There are not enough coaches really and I'm speculating, but I know that there are a lot of kids out there that don't even know what rugby is that would love the game and would love the sport if they had the opportunity to play because of its inclusive nature alone, right? And because of the opportunity that everyone on that team has to be a star, to run with the ball, to tackle, at that level, and even in flag rugby to score a try, right? So the nature of the sport offers something for every single person that engages in it and offers them every single opportunity to do and be those things that, everybody wants to be. They want to be the star. They want to be the scorer. They want to run the ball.
It also seems like it's probably a pretty affordable sport to set up.
Absolutely is, right? So, I mean, the biggest cost in the sport would be just, like the coaching, right? And so you don't have the equipment costs. For flag, you simply need a space, an open space that's the size of a basketball court, really. And you could obviously utilize half of the field, but for flag rugby, you need flags, for each player, and you need a ball. So there's nothing cheaper, right? And then when you elevate to tackle rugby, then you don't need the flags. You simply need mouth guard and a ball, right? So the critical thing, I think, again, is having good coaches and cultivating and developing coaches that know the game, that also not just know the game and understand the rules of the game, but understand like positive coaching, because that's a big part of rugby that I think differentiates it from sometimes football, and not to dismiss or shed any negative light on football, but it's just they're just different. They're different animals, and a lot of things that come into rugby because it's such an unknown and people are unexposed is that nurturing component that goes with coaching, that positive reinforcement that comes along. And so, yeah, the coaching development is key, and the just getting more kids playing and getting the ball in their hand is key. And so that's a big part of the reason why I'd like to be, I want to start this rugby company and get it off the ground, is to bring that opportunity to the kids that have never had it. Just like I was exposed to basketball and football as a kid, kids should be exposed to rugby as well. And they can make the choice of whether they want to continue it or whether they want to try other things. And that's great too. But I guarantee you that they will gain so much just from being exposed to rugby, gain so much to help them in their other sports and endeavors in life, because it's absolutely one of the hardest things to play, but one of the most fun games to play as well.
In terms of the women's sports, I noticed that there was an event in Las Vegas that combined the men's and women's. And how do you...
Yeah, that was...
Go ahead.
You got it. Go ahead.
So that sounded like it would make a huge difference in terms of popularity and just exposing a whole new group of people to the women's sport.
That was an amazing thing, and I credit United World Sports, which is the company that oversees that Vegas event, and I credit USA Rugby and Dan Payne in particular, because as the new CEO, or most recently appointed CEO of USA Rugby, he had the vision to push that forward and really work to. I know the relations between USA Rugby and United World Sports prior to his coming on board were a bit strained. And so he wanted to very quickly build that relationship and make it a good relationship. And they came together and they really pushed for this event along with World Rugby, because obviously World Rugby oversees that. But that was enormous. Having the women involved in that tournament was great, and it was a great starting point. Now, going forward, I believe that what needs to happen, and as we can continue to build this, number one, bridge this gender disparity, right? This equity issue in the sport of rugby, which does exist. There's definitely a disparity. And the way we're going to be able to bridge that and make Vegas even bigger for both the men and the women is to integrate those games so that the men and the women are playing. Then the course of that tournament, it starts and ends for both. So it's not just the women playing on one day and the men playing on one day, and then the last day they both play, like having it all integrated, right?
So I, as a fan, could buy my ticket and I could watch one men's game and then one women's game.
Absolutely, right? And again, like, it's exciting. They're not, obviously, there are no two things that are exactly alike and identical, but they're so similar, and they both offer such spectacular such a spectacular draw, that it's a no-brainer. And then what comes with that also is then media, right? NBC broadcast some of the men's games during that weekend, over the course of the weekend, and it's to get some of those women's games on there as well. Make a part of the negotiations, in broadcasting this event, and that means that, USA Rugby has a big voice at the table to push this forward. And it means that United World Sports would do the same. And then hopefully, NBC would buy in as well to broadcast the women's games as well, right? I think the idea is we get to a place where we see more women's rugby on television, high level rugby. We offer it to the general public because they haven't been exposed to it. Women's sports in general, it's just not as widespread on television as men's. And so naturally, it's not going to be as popular. So you have to be able to be willing to do a little bit more to bridge the gap. And so that's what we're asking. You can't go out there when you have when there's an imbalance and expect to put the same amount in both and change the results. You have to put a little bit more in one, a little bit more energy to build one up so that it can gain some momentum. And so I think that's a big part of it too, and making it and commercializing it and making it more marketable so that eventually it translates into dollars. Because at the end of the day, that's been the argument, right, with women's and men's sports. Well, women's sports aren't, broadcast as much because they don't generate as much money, but it's not a dollars and cents issue, it's an equity issue. And until we can get our heads around that and start approaching it from that perspective, then we're probably never going to get anywhere. But we take it as an equity issue and bridge that gap, then the trust that the money will come, and all of those other things will come about. So
sure.
It was a tremendous success to have the women play in the stadium in Vegas. And I look forward to what's to come next year.
And are they working on all your suggestions, or the suggestions that you talked about here? Are they on board?
I hope so. I'm going to be meeting next week with United World Sports to have a conversation a little bit with them about it. I will be pushing this. Obviously, I've had numerous conversations with Dan Payne at USA Rugby. And it's something that I, as a newly elected USA Rugby board member, will be bringing into play as well with the board just to discuss. But that's something that the board, and honestly, we've talked about. It's something in that we are working on in terms of a mission statement and a mission. The next step is to strategically map out our quest to bridge this gap. So it's definitely looking up, right? It's being discussed, it's being talked about, and now it's about just bringing possible solutions to the table that are going to help with us leading the fight in gender equity as a sport.
Great.
Yeah, I think if America can take the lead on it, then the world will follow.
And hopefully other sports will follow as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
So how is your work progressing for the fall beginning of your Monroe College's rugby team, the first women's rugby team, right?
Yeah, it's been going really well. I'm working alongside James English, the director of rugby at Monroe, and then the men's head coach, Dylan Fawcett, and I call him Butch, so I'd like to refer to him as Butch. I don't know him as Dylan. But this season with the men has been great, and it's number one, it's allowed me to kind of learn the landscape of Monroe and what we do there. What they do there. We've had a number of women express interest and actually sign up. It's PSAL season here in New York, so that's essentially the public school athletic league, and it's rugby season. So Play Rugby's is at the helm of all rugby activities in the city for high school. So what we do is we go out, on the respective dates and just watch games. James and I will be watching some matches with the girls, high school rugby teams and talking to some of those players about, joining us in the fall at Monroe. So this is recruiting season. We're in the midst of recruiting season, and it will continue through out most of the month of May to bring some of those ladies along. So yeah, it's looking good. I mean, Monroe College is, although it's not a varsity college, or rugby's not a varsity sport, the athletes in rugby get treated like varsity athletes. So the only difference in us and a varsity program is that we're just not a sanctioned varsity program. But everything, is taken care of for the players. They get the same treatment, as say like in the allowances as the basketball team, or any other varsity program on campus, which you can't beat, right? And so for now, we are happy with that. But it certainly, the program's only been on the ground. It hasn't even been a full year that even the men's program was established. And so in light of all of those circumstances, Monroe is extremely, extremely supportive of rugby, and they love their rugby. We just want to continue to see it grow. And so I have very high hopes for the women's program this fall. It's going to probably be very similar in building this program as the men's program was, and just basically teach these young ladies basic skills. We get them fit, and then we let them play rugby. So looking forward to it.
Do you have a coaching philosophy for that team?
I'm not really that big on philosophies. I think positive, being just the virtue of the sport, right? Positivity is a big thing. We ask that, I guess my ask is that everyone give their all when they're there, focusing on what they're doing, but they also give their all when they're not there. So it means, engaging fully as a student, just encouraging these young ladies to just be the best human beings they can be and breaking it down into various scenarios and showing them how they can do that, or inspiring them to do it in the way that comes naturally for them. So I don't really have any official philosophy on anything other than just, being the best that you can be, and what that ends up being is enough. And if you're doing that, as a rugby player, as a student, as as just a meaningful and giving citizen to the world, it takes care of itself. One thing is to just try to leave the world a better place than you found it, and then leave everything you enter in a better state than you found it.
I would love to ask about what you're doing in your own training.
Yeah, I'm training every day. Today is fortunately a rest day for me, which is so well deserved. But I train with New York Rugby Club, which is my club team, and I'm came back out for the spring so that I could have the opportunity to play and build up to our training camps this summer for the U.S. For the most part, spend Mondays and Tuesdays working out, working on my subunit skill set. I'm trying out as a hooker, so doing a lot of throwing, training my fitness, weightlifting, watching some film, and then engaging in our team practices with New York. So yeah, that takes a lot out of me. I do, but a big part of my training protocol is doing a lot of stretching, a lot of yoga. Probably not as much as I've wanted to over the last few weeks. So definitely got to tighten that up. And meditating, and I guess yoga is moving meditation, but I spend quite a bit of time meditating in different ways to balance, to clear my mind. And it helps me also with breathing, right? Because a big focus in meditation in some forms is just the breath. So it all these things play into my ability to be a better player, and to still be able to do this at 42, very critical, especially the meditation piece. I'm very aware of a lot of other things now that I wasn't necessarily aware of as a younger player.
How long have you been meditating?
I've been meditating for a few years now. Probably, pretty consistently for the last 3 or 4 years, and most consistently over the last year. It's been just a really big part of my life and my existence, and just become just a daily part of my practice, right? Of just this practice of life.
And you've noticed definite differences.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, undeniably, like I look at life through a completely different lens than I used to, and everything that I do is affected by it. But there's just an extremely heightened awareness of everything, and my view of things has shifted so much. Just my view of life in general, and then on the rugby pitch, it's just there's a unique calmness that I have that I never had, when I wasn't meditating, when I was not aware in that way. Just my reactions are different. They're probably faster many times now. My breathing when you're out there working hard on the field, it's a lot more controlled. So it's just everything has changed. My whole life experience has shifted dramatically since I've meditated.
And what about at Monroe College? Will you share it with that team?
Absolutely. And again, I haven't really done a lot with the men because I came in at a time where they were already convening and doing their own thing, but it's certainly something I've talked to James about employing with the women, and maybe even at the start of the season next year, it'll be something that we can roll out with both teams. But I think also it's a very personal thing because for me there's that spiritual element to it, and I think that everyone has to kind of come to it in their own time. But I love, I'm open to introducing it, to the collective group, but it's something that people just need to kind of find when they're ready, and it will find them when they're ready, right. Just like it found me. But it's definitely something that I want to start with the women, so that it becomes just, even if there's that they can't make that spiritual connection right off the bat, they're at least able to integrate the practices of breathing into their protocol, and it will then just kind of inherently make its way, right? It'll just evolve for them in the way it's meant to. But it's certainly something I will do with Monroe College.
I think one of the things that's interesting about that and incorporating it as a team for the Monroe College is that I find that it's really hard to fit it into the schedule, and you think, oh, that's the thing that I can take off, that, it's not as important. It's not as important to do my stretching or my yoga or my meditation, mm-hmm. Where, as you're talking about, it's part of a whole process. It's a part of a whole person.
Absolutely. And it's that piece that I feel like many people miss. They don't necessarily connect. Like you say, it's the first thing to go on the chopping block, when in reality, it's the most integral and important thing that they can have in order to succeed and have full alignment with everything else in their life. And so it's so critical, right? It's actually sometimes I think the recovery part of sport is more important many times than the strength and conditioning and the fitness part of it, because what that part does is it opens up space so that those other things can be maximized, and that's on a very, and then that's just coming at it from a very physical perspective. Like there's then that other the that X factor, those less physical and those emotional and intangibles that values that come as a result of it. And I think players IQ skyrockets when they can tap into just that. So certainly something that's at the forefront and really important and shouldn't be ignored. So yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Phaidra, very much. I look forward to hearing more.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. And thank you for taking the interest. Grateful for that.
You were very welcome, and maybe we'll meet in San Francisco.
That'd be great.
Yep. Awesome. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Sure. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. All episodes are available on iTunes, Stitcher, and from hearhersports.com listen page. If you're interested in more information about women in sports, every other Thursday I send out a short email filled with related articles, highlights from the episode, links to sport videos I find, and other stuff I've been thinking about. Subscribe at hearhersports.com. It's also a great help if you rate the podcast or leave a review on whichever platform you're listening. Doing so helps spread the word and makes it possible for more fans of women in sports to find it. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Hear Her Sports.
Hey there, and welcome to the Joy of Paddle podcast, hosted by me, Minter Dial, a veteran of the paddle tennis world, and sponsored by Paddle 1969. Whether you're a paddle tennis aficionado, just beginning, or have never even heard of paddle, or padel, as it's called in North America, this is an exhilarating new show that delves into the captivating stories of notable paddle personalities worldwide. In its inaugural season, you'll be treated to exclusive anecdotes, valuable tips, life lessons, and humorous moments shared by esteemed professional paddle players, industry insiders, and passionate paddle enthusiasts. With each season aligning with the Pro Tour, you can anticipate 2 engaging episodes per month. The Joy of Paddle podcast is part of the Evergreen Podcast Network, where you can find other great shows in a number of categories, such as sports, health and wellness, true crime, and fiction. To find out more about Evergreen Podcasts, go to www.evergreenpodcast.com. Vamos!